What happens when you place two socially inept individuals who gain most of their reputation from Discord in the same circle, yet instead of having them actively engage in arguments, you have them become friends and slowly but surely their individual egos rise to the boiling point which inevitably breeds animosity? Arianos and Apollo is a curious tale for a few reasons. Both of them have immensely inflated egos and perceptions of themselves, with Arianos describing himself as not only the best debater, but also one of the greatest men who have ever lived, with nothing actually showing or indicating this aside from his accomplishments within the Discord debating sphere, and the fact that he needed to pretend to be another man, recently being exposed for catfishing, and also attempting to flirt with Cynthia in her DMs, only to be aired. But aside from that, we also have Apollo, who describes himself as a legendary intellectual giant, who's a step above the rest of the debating sphere, and in fact you'll be able to see that description of him if you click on his YouTube page, and actually just simply go onto his description. You'll be able to see it right there, and you'll be able to see how much of a loser he is. But one might think that this sort of relationship will be quick to fall to its knees. After all, how can there be two egotistical losers who have nothing going for them within the community? The answer is simple: codependency. Through combining their shared influence, cultivating their methods, including but not limited to harassment, debate gooning, social engineering, and the slightest glimmers of skill, both of these parties have managed to create a codependent quote-unquote empire in which they would both stand at the top, only tolerating being below one another, with Apollo even flat out saying at some point he was fine with being below Arianas. Obviously, if you placed him below Arianas now, you'd get hung, drawn, and quartered, because how dare you, who do you think you are, to put TKA, the King Apollo, the good boy Apollo, who's a good boy for Vinny, right? How dare you think that he's worse than anyone within the Discord debating sphere, you scum? But anyways, even Apollo's former buddy, Cynthia, who recently ripped out Apollo's spine on theology when they were arguing about the problem of evil, on the most part, Apollo tried to form a codependent relationship with him trying to leech off of Cynthia's fame and leech off of Cynthia's vouchers in order to place himself as a high-level debater. However, if you actually witness that debate, you won't be able to witness the sort of claimed relativity that Apollo said he had with Cynthia, where Apollo said that Cynthia would probably be the hardest debate of his life. You won't see any of that. Instead, what you see is a man who thought he could reach the stars. However, like Icarus, he just burnt and fell to the floor. Not only that, he thought he was Icarus even. The guy didn't even get off the floor. It's a pathetic leech who needs to like roll across the floor like a worm in order to gain all of the nutrients he has available to him, such that he can create a mountain of dirt which can eventually reach the stars. Yet obviously we know that it never will. With that being said though, these two losers managed to crawl out of wherever pit of hell that in which they were born in, and create quote-unquote respect within the community, but also a budding respect with each other. You would think that this sort of relationship would go rise to a budding friendship. After all, how can you relate to somebody, or specifically, how can you hate somebody who's so alike yourself, unless you have so many hateable qualities? Wink wink, nudge nudge, nobody likes either of these guys. You see, whenever two people are actually consistently hyped up, especially two people consistently hype each other up, one of the things in which most people enjoy doing is comparison. Comparison, as many people like to say, is the thief of joy. However, for these guys, whose joy is only derived off of debating and nothing else, this is not quite the truth. See, ego thrives off of validation, meaning that being considered better than the other party, the only other party I should add, who they would bother considering even comparable to them in terms of debating skill, is an actually immense boost for their ego, right? Especially when they gain no other validation outside from that. And so these guys would actually initially begins at them talking behind each other's backs, with both of them each trying to cultivate their own individual fame, cultivate their own individual goon squad, who goons for primarily them instead for the conjunction of both of them, right? And promotes their feats, right, while putting down the feats of the other. Obviously, both of them at a certain point come to the very rude yet real realization that they have nothing to offer one another aside from surface level conversations about football, debate talks, and also debate skill. So instead, what they did was they started running campaigns. Now, I don't know if you noticed, I don't know if you were there in 2024, whoever's watching this video. In 2024, Apollo would create servers with his own banner called the Apollo establishment. Were it to be called Apollo 2024, I don't know what he thought he was doing. Maybe he was trying to run for debate president. I don't know who he thought he was. But you definitely notice this with Ariana's. When you notice, if you go on Ariana's schizophrenic community post, you actually notice that consistently he talks about this self-made establishment who is out to get him because they don't recognize his debating feats. After all, by his own admission, he has the greatest debating CV who has ever existed. You'll be able to listen to the words coming out of my mouth and you realize I sound like a crazy person, and that's because Arianas, the person who's spitting out these words, is a crazy person. Now you also need to ask yourself, okay, if Arianas is a crazy person, how has Apollo managed to tolerate his presence for so long? The answer is because they are so alike that they probably can't even tell each other apart. If Arianas was black, you wouldn't be able to tell him or you wouldn't be able to even recognize the difference from Apollo, especially when Arianas blatantly is like a racist, goes about calling black people the N-word. Yeah, Apollo, obviously, like the good boy he is, he takes the racism on the chin. He doesn't say anything because he's his good friend on Discord, right? So he takes the racism on the chin and he doesn't comment about it. He doesn't say it's weird because obviously, why would he, right? He's saying that Apollo is tier 1. What else does Apollo need in life aside from being tier 1, right? That's all he's actually built his life up to. Again, Apollo is somebody who actually hypes himself up as somebody who doesn't change his opinions depending on whether or not he's friends with somebody. However, I have a few interesting screenshots that I want to show the audience, which may actually change this opinion. And let's just say these screenshots are quite telling on their own. Ignoring all of the screenshots of him e-dating, you also have these very telling screenshots. Dog shit tier list. Ariana's beating Detroit recently on physicalism and the opaqueness of phenomenal concepts. Lucario admits I'm better than him, and I've beaten Eric, and that's on my YouTube. Destiny has beaten T-Jump on more realism. Aside from like almost none of these takes actually being true, right? You also notice that immediately after, whenever Arianas began talking bad about him, he says he's never beaten Detroit, nor has he ever beaten Avi. He's never even debated Avi. Now you'll be asking yourself, okay, well, one of these screenshots we have for the other? The answer is no. Apollo, what he did there, instead of, and I know the cope would be, oh, what if he just rewatch the recording? You and I both know that isn't true, right? So instead, what actually happened was Apollo changed his opinion, like he does all the time. And in fact, I'll show you another instance of Apollo changing his opinion. So you'll notice that right, and a wide variety of people, you notice C, who he considers, he said was really bad, by the way. C is a high tier 2. I am in tier 2. Right? Yet you notice that after coming into contact and beefing with them, you notice that we're all the way down here. Now you may ask yourself, okay, well, without actually debating, what may have caused this change? The answer is, again, Apollo likes having people to feed into his ego. The more you feed into his ego, the more you'll be able to move upwards and upwards. The more active you are as a debater, that also means that the more you can promote his own debates, right, and say that he's a good debater. And if you also don't believe me, we have these screenshots here where he goes actively, he's trying to go into Ariana's comment section where Ariana is hating on him, by the way, right? And he goes in there and he tries to have people show him support, because normally the people who are watching these on like whatever sort of people are actively going into Ariana's community post, right? None of them are giving him the support and the validation that he so deeply desires, and because of that he needs other people to go and do it for him, so much so that he'll actively go out and ping in the server so he can gain the support. You might have also seen this in other contexts. I've made YouTube posts on this specifically, wherever Tron or somebody like that, and I know it happens in private servers, they'll ping you in the private server to go and make a comment on who won, but then you realize if you compare the average watch time of the video in comparison to all of the people who are saying who won, the watch time on average will be at least 4 minutes, right? So clearly somebody's lying, right? And the answer is like, these people who are making all of these comments are probably lying. They probably don't even watch these videos, right? Again, this is just further enhancing Apollo's like individual urge for debate and validation. But this isn't only a video on Apollo, so instead we'll move on to Ariana's as well and Apollo's relationship. So let's read out a few screenshots. The worst people in this community are those who are crazy enough to think that telling tales is the way to get popular. This fantasy island character, Apollo, who has a worse reputation than John Lee in the debate community. Keep in mind, this is somebody who somebody who Ariana's recognized as his quote-unquote debate equal. Only a few months before that, he's trying to desperately up his -2% favorability among fiction debaters by lying about who he's defeated. Apollo is one of the many people on Discord who isn't interested in moving forward this debate community. Keep in mind, he isn't either. All he does is schizophrenically post about how he's the greatest debater on his YouTube post. We need to take away his privileges. He's only interested in his own ego. Again, supremely ironic. That nobody gives a flying Jamaican fuck about. There is only one guy who can fix this community, and it's the guy who has defeated Detroit. Yeah, like, come on. And then, in fact, we can cite all of the other community posts he's made. If you go on his page and you just continuously scroll down, instead of actually like witnessing it as somebody who has a lot to say, somebody who's highly intelligent, being able to express their opinion freely, right? Instead, what you notice is it seems more like the ramblings of a madman. Arianos personally is somebody who likes to pride himself on the fact that he's very high in terms of intelligence, high in terms of self-confidence, and also high in terms of riches. Somebody who's supposedly complete as an individual. You'll notice that he actually faked being another human being. He sat there and faked that he was a man, right, with a six-pack abs. Yeah, immediately he got exposed, he immediately deleted it. Now you wonder to yourself, okay, well, why did he delete it? The answer is simply because these people are ashamed of themselves. They're afraid. Like, at least this is the sort of respect that you can give to Apollo, right, in comparison to somebody like Arianos, where he's actually confident enough to show his face, right? Well, it is a matter of confidence, but more so another matter of like he needs validation. But it's a matter such as that, because of his desperate and incessant and parasitic need for validation, he decided to post another man's face and unironically say it's his own. Now, it isn't a case of, oh, he said it was his own as a joke, because nobody finds him funny. Realistically, the only sort of reasons you'd come onto an Arianos post is either A, to see if he's debated somebody new, which he usually hasn't, right? Instead, he spent all of his time prevaricating, obfuscating, and prolificating away from actually debating somebody, right? And you also see Apollo doing the same thing. However, again, in contrast, Apollo is actually somebody who debates. Not to say that Apollo is much better, by the way. Apollo is still bottom of the barrel scum. Like, I don't know how you can ever interact or engage with them, right? But again, all of this internal Cold War level beef in which both of these losers engaged in eventually led up with the two of them debating. They debated twice, both of them being on meta-ethics, with Apollo again incessantly trying to be aggressive and show off this quote-unquote rhetoric that he's so proud of. In fact, you'll notice that Apollo is in fact so proud of his rhetoric that in these screenshots with Jester, and I'll pull it up now. No, it isn't here. There we go. In this screenshot with Jester, like the first thing, or well, the last thing I should say, keep in mind this is at 6 a.m., right? That Apollo has to ask him is, do you think in comparison to back then and now I sound differently? This is somebody who, keep in mind, he would constantly shit on, constantly say that, oh, Jester is a supremely bad debater. But yet he's sitting there asking him for validation. It's as though instead of it being merely just validation from competent people, he just wants validation in general. In like, at least to put this in crude terms, Apollo is just a man who's thirsty for praise, which is why he also gets off to being called a good boy by girls on Discord, right? Now you will notice that the sort of cope that Apollo will try and give you is saying that all of this behavior is normal, but I want to keep in mind that Apollo is the first, in fact, and also primary person who would hate on people for e-dating. Not only that, right, Apollo is also the same sort of person who will clown you for e-dating. And I promise you, and I can swear to you this, that if Apollo was never actually caught e-dating, if he caught you e-dating, he would definitely clown you for it. It's absolutely ridiculous that this guy can get away with saying, oh, it's normal. And no, in fact, it is not normal, right? Like, yes, I understand people do it. Going on Snapchat at like 2 a.m. and saying, hey, what do you look like? Do you send? Right? People do it, right? Lots of people do it. That doesn't make it any less weird, right? So whenever people are talking about the fact that Apollo is a weirdo who can't actually interact with women in real life, and you'll notice that he can't interact with women in real life, because whenever people are speaking of, hey, you probably shouldn't text me, you should text your other girl, they aren't talking about some girl in real life that he's mentioned. They're talking about some other girl on Discord, right? And that should probably show you that instead of it being these respectable figures who should look look up to. Both Apollo and Arianas, instead of that, are just two men with fragile egos, broken hearts, right, who've been left completely aired and unread by people who supposedly respect them. Every single time I see Apollo leave a debate live, right, especially on TikTok, Apollo is looked at like, essentially he's looked at the way you look at somebody, a crazy person on the street, right? He's just incessantly yelling. You don't want to listen to what he has to say at all, right? You don't want to hear what the words are coming out of his mouth. Now, again, I can't detract from the fact that yes, maybe you can grant Apollo is a alright debater, but he definitely isn't alright in the head, right? It seems as if like as though he's invested, same with Arianas by the way, that both of these two crude animals have invested most of their real life statistics, right? Instead of investing it like balanced, right? Such that yeah, sure, maybe they're better at debating than they are like talking to people in real life. Who cares? Like if it's a little bit, but instead of that, they've invested and placed all of their like life savings, their energy, their time, right, onto the app of Discord entirely. And you'll notice this because Apollo also will go about, right, somebody who, keep in mind, claims to have a proper job, by the way, right, goes about begging people for money. So really there's not much else to say, right, aside from that. Like, if you like the video, please remember to like and subscribe, and let's get it, bro.